Hey everyone, welcome to Clutch Up. This is your boy Greg here. Let's go. All right, everyone, thanks for joining. We have a donation right off the top from Wreck-It Alf too. You guys got creative names over here. So the question is, what is your favorite part about gaming? And, you know, there's so many things to say on this question, but for me, to be honest, my favorite thing was back in the days, like when we had like the worst graphics on games and they look like squares instead of people. Like the number one thing that I loved about gaming was the story mode. Like think about it. Think about those throwback games, those systems like Atari or Sega Genesis, Dreamcast. Like there was no online on those. So really like the best part about those games was the story mode. It was to beat the game, right? And that's why big head kid Greg would run to his mom and try to get N64 cartridges, because we wanted to try and get to the end. We wanted to face the master hand. We wanted on that Game Boy Color to face the Elite Four, right? And the struggle was worth it. That's what it was all about. Oh, hold on. It looks like we got another donation from Base Choyer. It says, who is better at Smash 64, you or Chase Boyer? Me, of course. I mean, seriously, like, can you see my shelf? Like, I got all the games right here. I got it even plugged in, ready to go. Like, this is what I'm about. So come on, man. You can't be asking these kinds of questions. For all of us, though, it can feel like real life is like the hardest game we'll ever play. Am I right? Like, and if we're being real, what it looks like to beat the game really isn't that appealing. Like whether it's like a middle class average life or it's like that of an NBA star or like a giant YouTube platform, it's all like temporary at best, right? And it seems like the more and more that we try to leverage our game controller to get the life that we want, the easier it is that it slips through our fingers. And that's like a good life. Like that's like something that we would actually strive for. Like heaven forbid we mention war, political tribalism, hateful people, and those who were born into oppression and abuse without a chance at any sort of happiness at all. Why the heck would I want to buy this kind of game? It's impossibly difficult, and there seems to be no benefit in success. So what I'm driving at here is that if we don't like the game that we're playing, we're less likely to jump in and play it, right? If we don't like the way that the game ends, we're not going to hop in and pick up the sticks. But what if that's not really how the game ends? What if we bought a faulty walkthrough guide on what life is actually about or where it's all headed? And that's why I'm glad that you joined the stream today, because we're going to be looking at this thing called the Mountain Walk. And I think that it's a pretty good guide, and it goes like this: love God, love people, serve the world. And the last of which, that's what we're going to be looking at today. But serving the world is about playing the game. It's about picking up the stick. So we have to start with the end in mind, right? And really what we're going to be answering is the question, what does it look like in God's mind for us to beat the game? And for that, I'd like to introduce you to a man named Isaiah. I think we could all agree that at some level, the world is broken, right? Like something is off. And for my man Isaiah, he'd probably say the same thing. He lived in Jerusalem around the time of 8th or 7th century BC. And a lot of what his picture looked like to beat the game was centered around this personal God named Yahweh. That's how they knew him. We know him as God, right? And Yahweh was the God of gods, the one who was compassionate and gracious, who they knew to have spoken the universe and everything in it into existence. And he did it so that everything he created could, in unity, share in his loving kindness and enjoy peace with each other and himself. But if we were to talk to Isaiah, we'd probably be like, yeah, dude, likely story. Like, look at the world. It looks nothing like that. The world's in the crapper, and this Yahweh is doing nothing to fix it. And Isaiah would probably reply and say, yeah, like, bro, you're right. But that has nothing to do with Yahweh. He'd say that because his people, Israel, were the ones through whom God would accomplish his purposes for the world, but instead they became a part of the problem. This is why Yahweh commissioned Isaiah to begin with, to become a prophet, someone who reveals God's purposes. The scrolls that contain Isaiah's prophecies about God's purposes were compiled into what we now know as the book of Isaiah, and it's in our Old Testament. And we know it there as the book of Isaiah, as I said. So one of them was about God's vision for what restoration to this broken world looks like, and it's found in Isaiah chapter 2. So here it is. Here's the answer to the big question that we were talking about earlier. What does it look like in God's mind to beat the game? What does healing to this broken world look like for God? Now, Isaiah, after hearing God paint this picture, describes it this way. Y'all ready for it? Here it is. Unity. Not the cheap kind either. Not the one where everyone looks, thinks, and acts the same. No, not that kind of unity. He describes it as people who were once hostile enemies of each other. Nations that brutally oppress other nations. Whole groups of people who feel forgotten and are desperate for purpose. People, bitter enemies from all backgrounds, nationalities, skin tones, ethnicities, being united by purpose and calling. Having direct access to the very center of love and joy and peace found in the reign and rule of God. They would say to each other, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways and that we may walk in his paths." All right, wait. Okay, so we got another question. Shout out to Proud Vegan XO. Just made a donation. Thank you, I appreciate you. So what's your question? All right, so question is, sounds sort of like a churchy answer to a churchy problem. And I would say, Proud Vegan, yo, that's like astute. Like that's a good statement. Like I don't blame you for that. Because I mean, like, you could hear a story like this and be like, come on, bro. Like, there's no way that's going to happen. There's no way any of this kind of stuff that we're talking about in church, this unity, this peace, this kind of like, you know, utopia society is ever going to happen. But that disillusionment, that boredom that we have with that very familiar story is because we've been burnt by believing that this story can even come to pass, right? We've been burnt by believing that this picture can actually come true in our lifetime. So when we're burnt like that, we're like, what can we do to even fix it? But the scriptures can actually tell us a different story about what we're capable of, right? The Bible tells us not only that we can do something, but we are actually God's plan to change the brokenness we see in the world. Isaiah actually tells us what it looks like. He says in the very next verse, he says, "And they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore." So check this out, y'all. In the picture that God is painting, the weapons we use to divide and destroy are turned into tools used to cultivate and maximize the world he created, bringing blessing and healing. In this world order or kingdom God is looking to bring, what we used to wound ourselves and others will be transformed into instruments of God's redemption, not only for ourselves, but for the world he created. In other words, in God's mind, to beat the game is to serve the world. Now, hold up. Like, this is why we think Christianity is suspect, right? Because we don't normally see Christians doing this, am I right? I mean, it seems like we've dropped the sticks entirely. I mean, most of us would say, sure, it would be nice to be a part of that picture, but I know that I fall short. And when I look for people who've actually lived like this, they're few and far between, even among people who actually like believe this stuff. In fact, it seems like sometimes we're the main source of the problem instead of bringing the fixing and the healing, just like Israel in Isaiah's day. So where can we turn if the bearers of the message end up being the ones who corrupt it? Isaiah asked this very same question, and God had an answer. His answer had a name: Jesus, from the Nowheresville town of Nazareth. He lived centuries after Isaiah, but was of the same nationality. And when presented with the opportunity to pick up a weapon against those who opposed him, he instead used it as an opportunity to heal and bless. The reason is because he came to start an actual movement that would become the vision that Isaiah saw way back in the day, which we know as the kingdom of God. We see this in a story from one of the most thorough accounts of Jesus's life, the Gospel in Luke, in which he tells the story of Jesus's betrayal by a man named Judas. So Judas basically sold Jesus down the river. And in so doing, it seemed like he sold the entire vision of peace and unity down the river as well. And that's why people came with Judas. That's why the people that came with Judas were armed, because they knew that Jesus was powerful. They came to arrest Jesus while he was spending time with some of his closest friends. Let's take a look at how it all went down when Jesus and his boys arrived on the scene. And when those who were around him saw what would follow, they said, "Lord, shall we strike with the sword?" And one of them struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus said, "No more of this." And he touched his ear and healed him. Oh, hold on, man. Like, how was Jesus even able to do this? How could he choose nonviolence when everyone else would? Like, your boys are with you, there's people coming with weapons, you're about to get down, and then Jesus chooses to heal people? Like, how could he even summon that kind of strength to do that? Well, it's because he didn't just seem to beat the game. He did. He was God in human flesh who came to put an end to the chaotic sea of violence brought out by a broken world that's amplified by the brokenness that's in us. He did it by letting that brokenness consume him and break him to the point of execution and unjust suffering. He did it by defeating the worst that evil and darkness could throw at him and rising again in victory. And now he's extending to you and to me the very same power he had to stand amidst all of the fraught and chaotic world that we live in and say, "No more of this." So if you're watching this and you're fed up, tired of seeing the wars, heartbroken by the divisions, the anger, the poor and the vulnerable being ignored, it's your turn to play. Remember, God's plan to change the world doesn't just involve you, it is you, right? It's the whole reason Jesus played the game, is for us to get in the game with him. So it's time for you to come in clutch. How are you going to bring healing today? We're not asking you to put on someone's ear again, right? Like, that's not a requirement. But if you can, all power to you. No, around here, the way we describe it is like so. Get going and give generously. So how does this look for us? Well, it looks like sitting at lunch with someone we see is always sitting alone. It looks like inviting friends to stream with us that would love to do it. It looks like us raising money for someone that might not be able to afford summer camps this year. It looks like us participating in generosity at services here at Mountain. It looks like us using the very things that were used for destruction and then using them for God's kingdom. Swords into plowshares, spears into pruning hooks. Remember, to beat the game is to serve the world. And this game needs you to play.